what's up, everybody? Isaac here, Civil Engineering Academy. Excited to be with you on another podcast episode. Definitely like and subscribe these if you haven't already. And, share them with a friend. Sharing's caring, right? So, hey, I'm excited today. I bring Jake Adkins. He's actually a mechanical engineer, but we connected through LinkedIn, and he has an awesome blog site where he talks about his thoughts as an engineer, but also becoming a manager. They're the most practical pieces of advice I have ever seen in terms of the engineering world. And I just love how down to earth he is. And he can take concepts that you've probably thought about, like going from engineer to manager, and really breaking them down as to what happens when that happens. The character that you have to play and take, what happens to employees as you take a management role. We also talk about the hiring process and engineering cells. So there's a wide variety of things that we talk about that I think you're really going to want to pay attention to, because he nails these things just spot on. So he does a wonderful job. So Jake is jumping on. I know I think I've interviewed maybe a couple mechanical engineers. I'm not being biased to you mechanical engineers. All engineering is good, but I'm just thankful that he jumped on to share his thoughts with us. So anyway, with that, I want you to pay attention with the stuff he's got to say, because it's all good stuff. It's going to be coming up right after this. All right, we are running. Jake, thanks for joining me on the Civil Engineering Academy podcast. I appreciate you jumping on here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, this will be fun. So I kind of connected with you through LinkedIn, but really it's through the blog articles I noticed you've been writing. And we haven't had too many mechanical engineers on the show, which is probably my fault, but we're not biased like that. We like mechanical engineers. But before we dive into anything, why don't you tell me how, I guess, you found yourself into engineering and what you do today?
Sure. Yeah. I was, that's kind of a winding road, I think, for me to have settled on mechanical engineering. I was always, traditionally the same story, into Legos, into science, good at math, as most engineers are. And they go, oh, you should be an engineer. I didn't really know any engineers. Like, there wasn't anybody I really knew that was an engineer or knew what they did. And so it didn't really strike me as something to do. In high school, we had somebody so I went to Clemson University. We had somebody from Clemson come down, and they did the, it's polymer engineering or something like that. So they kind of did a cool demonstration of like the stuff that they can, the stuff that they're developing. And I think they had, that stuff that goes into baby diapers is very absorbent. And
yes.
So, they're pouring water in a cup and then turning it upside down, and it doesn't show. And so I thought, well, that sounds cool. And then I started looking, I went for a visit and saw, it's sort of a limited field. And so I thought, chemical engineering. And so I enrolled in Clemson, and then very quickly realized that I do not like chemistry at all. I hate chemistry. And so it's probably not a good route for me. So I was like, well, I like machines too. So let's do mechanical, and ended up there. Did a quick 2-year stint in the automotive industry, and about 2008, if you recall what was going on then, everything that I did was in SUVs. Oil hit $150 a barrel. You couldn't give an SUV away. And so and I was like, hey, I should probably leave before they asked me to leave, because it was not looking great at our company. Ended up going to an oil and gas company, and was there for 14 years, worked my way up through multiple levels of engineer, senior engineer, engineering manager, senior manager. And then recently I have left that company in Houston, come here to Virginia, and I am the director of engineering for a little bit of a smaller company, but we do maintenance of way equipment for the rail industry, so maintaining the tracks and the ballast.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the rail industry's been all over the news these days. So,
It has, yes. And I will say, luckily, my company is not part of this, so we're just observers.
yeah. Well, take me through this. One of the blog articles you write is the big change that happens when you go from being an engineer to being a
Mhm.
manager. So I guess could you touch on a couple obstacles that you saw when that change happened?
Yeah, so for me, the biggest adjustments were really, I think, three things. One of them was the time scale I was thinking in. One of them was the details that I was getting into, and the other one was what I'll say is like the almost the character of being a manager. So how do you manage? How are you a manager, and what does that look like? Um, and so for the detail on the detail side of things, that's really a difficult balance to to find because you need to be enough in the details to be able to use your experience and your expertise to figure out where, is there a problem here? Or is this going the right way? But not so much into the details that that's all you're doing and you're not thinking further into the future, things like that. So it's that one. I don't know that I can give any listener a good piece of advice of like, this is the level of detail you need to be in. It's just,
Well,
you've got to find it for yourself.
maybe I can comment on that. I think everyone's seen or had maybe a manager where they have dived into the details and you kind of
Mhm.
step back and wonder, why am I even designing this when my manager
Yep.
just comes in and does the whole thing for us? And
Sure.
I've seen that at management and director levels where they just cannot let go of
Yep.
being an engineer.
Yep.
So I definitely agree with you on there. You really need to find out where your new boundary is on letting it go and being involved.
Mhm. Well, and then on the other side of that, I've seen other managers not get into any of the details at all, and uh, a project, basically had no oversight. And so there is a balance that you have to get it. Sufficient detail is really the key, but I don't know how to define what that is.
Good balance. Yeah, good
Yep.
point.
And then the time scale, I think, is a little bit easier to have. So, I mean, as a manager, I think you really need to be thinking in the really three month to 1 year time frame as a frontline manager, as a first level manager. Um, as a individual contributor, you're always thinking about what's the next task I have to do. And as a manager, when you get it up, you need to start planning further in advance. And whether that is, if you need to push your guys to say, okay, well, I know we have 6 months to do this project, but we've got another project right after that. And so let's try to pull that timeline into 5 months to give us a little more time. Or if you look at it and you're looking at headcount and you're saying, okay, I've got enough people today, but in a year, I'm going to need 5 more people. And so the reality is that if in a year you need 5 more people, you probably need to have hired those people in 6 months before that, which means you probably need to start looking today.
Get the ball rolling.
Right. Right. Because
Yeah.
you can't just bring an engineer in off the streets. And even if they're a good engineer, competent, have experience, there's still a learning curve with your company, with the way things are done. And you've got to give them about 6 months before they can start to be productive. Even if they've had done exactly that job for a very similar company, you still need 6 months.
That's very true. Totally
Yep.
agree with you. Yeah. Good point there. Yeah, they kind of have to managers need to be able to forecast, look into the future a little bit and
Hmm.
plan ahead. So, a different way of thinking it versus just being an engineer where, hey, here's a project, you're focused on that project.
Right.
Maybe you've got a load of projects. I don't know, but you're focused on those. So, yeah, good points. And what was that third one you had?
Yes. So, so the third one is what I almost call like the character you play as a manager.
Ah,
And so I think some people maybe have it in them a little bit where they're just their natural personalities work as a manager. I don't. And so one of the things that that I learned from one of my managers early on in my career, and he was just, would ride you, and nothing you could do was right, things like that. And what I learned kind of quickly is that the only reason he did that is because he saw potential in you. The people who he didn't see any potential in were just kind of relegated off. Like, he was doing that to develop you. But then we were out of town somewhere, and had a session like that. And then, like, it was time for dinner. Workday was over. We are going to go and get dinner. And immediately he just changed. He was a different person. And, really nice, really kind, very encouraging, very easygoing as well. Didn't have, and I realized, like, oh, that's a character he's playing in order to, it's a role. And so that was where I was struggling with, is that, I've got a very easygoing, almost very passive personality. But in order to be a manager and a good manager, you can't be passive. You can't be this sort of crazy driver psychopath that makes people want to quit. But at the same time, you can't just say, oh, well, it'll be done in, it's a month late. It's all right. Okay, well, you didn't quite get those calculations right. That's okay. You've got to hold people to an expectation. So that's where I learned I had to develop the character of Jake the manager. And it's not totally a different person, but it's just, tweaked on my regular personality. During COVID, my wife, that was really the first time she saw what she calls work Jake. And she's like,
did she like work Jake?
She does not like work Jake. She does not like him at all. And she's just like, well, you're just so direct, and sometimes you're rude.
I think you've just described, like, the most accurate description of, like, a manager or becoming a manager that I've probably ever heard of. So I think you've nailed that really well. So, that's awesome. But yeah, I totally see that. And I've been in the same boat where you go to dinner with your manager and they're like a totally different person versus when you're working with them and it's like, dude, okay, off a little bit here. But yeah, I can see that there's a pressure they have on them, that they got to perform, they got to drive the ship. And, if you're wearing that manager hat, I guess, you take on the character.
Well, and also I'm sure there are some people who find themselves in a managerial position that maybe didn't want it, but it's being a manager. When you're not a manager and you look at the managers, you're like, oh, they just tell you what to do. And then you become a manager and then you realize, oh no, I still have bosses. And then, oh, by the way, I've got however many direct employees pushing back on me now too. And it just becomes very stressful. It's a lot of work. And you really aren't going to do that unless you really are driven to do something. And so there's also an internal drive that managers, I think, have more than just, and there's anything wrong with being an individual contributor for your career, which, to be honest with you, I think had some of my earlier companies had a track of becoming an expert engineer, like really laid out, I probably would have stayed and been happier being that expert engineer, just individual contributor. Maybe I'm leading projects, but they don't have direct reports, really continuing into the details and engineering things. But that wasn't a track that was available to me to advance and have an advanced career. So, but yeah, I think you're not going to become a manager unless you've got some kind of real drive to do it.
Awesome. Well, often you hear that engineers don't make great managers. I hear that often. And maybe it's like you described, maybe it's a position they didn't really want, but because of your work history, your experience, you're doing good work, they just naturally, hey, this is the guy that steps into that role. But sometimes they don't want it. Sometimes it's they get it, and then they realize this is not what they want. But
Yep.
I guess you got to discover that, and maybe it's a mix of your personality traits and what your goals are. I think also one of the things that engineers butt up against is typically the management route usually pays more.
hmm
So people lean towards that because there's definitely more dollars there, is what I've seen. But maybe you think otherwise. I think
No,
you still do well as an individual contributor, but everything that I've seen in terms of salaries and stuff, if you go the management route, there's usually, tied to higher salary levels.
yep, you absolutely can be tied to a higher salary level, higher bonus levels. If there's some companies, when you're not going to get the stock grants and things like that if you're not in a management track, and which are long-term incentives, right? So, yeah, and I think you're right. People will gravitate towards something they don't want to do just purely so they can get the money, and doing that is something that's going to, you're going to be unhappy and you're not going to be good at it, which is going to make you less happy.
There you go. Well, wow, this has been great. Let me walk through another thing you mentioned on one of your blogs. But you mentioned that when you became a manager, there was an employee or a coworker that you knew for like 5+ years, and as soon as you put on that management role, there was some friction there.
Yep.
Could you describe that relationship that happens when maybe you've worked with a team of people for years, and then all of a sudden you're the manager? How does that relationship change?
Yeah, it definitely changes, and for me, I've seen probably a couple of different reactions. So you get to some people who will basically do whatever you say because you're the manager, right? And like they attach that title, they attach the title to experience almost. And so, like last week, I would have asked you to do something and you would have pushed back on me. And then this week you do exactly that with no questions asked. And it's almost like that to me is dangerous as well, right? Because as a manager, you don't want to be autocratic. It needs to be a team effort, and people need to push back on you. And so you've got to encourage those people to say, no, look, I need your pushback. I need you to challenge my ideas. And then you've got the kind of opposite end of the spectrum, which is people who don't, they're not happy with you being in that role. They don't want to have somebody, and that can come from a couple of reasons. Maybe they didn't respect you to begin with. They thought they were better than you. Maybe they thought they should have had the job. And those are the really, I think, more difficult. Those are difficult cases to handle, and that one is going to take time to really work through. And unless it's really bad, you have the time to do it. If you have somebody who's just disruptive and insubordinate, you may have to make a human resources type decision, whether that's transferring them out of the group or terminating them or writing them up, whatever it is. But most people just kind of have that low level simmer of resent, which is not too bad, and you can work on it. And
they get over it over time too.
They'll get over it, and you as a manager can look for some ways to throw them some bones and to give them some props and make sure that they know they're appreciated and understood and things like that. And that's really, I think, one of the ways to go about doing that.
Yeah, I've noticed as managers, I've noticed just in the engineering world, there's a lot of times there's not enough props given to people. I mean, people are so busy, they just put their head down and go to work. But a little thank you and a job well done, even in front of like a team meeting. Hey, this guy knocked this out. We got it done. Just wanted to say thanks for doing that. Like that stuff goes a long way. They're definitely going to feel appreciated. Even a small gift card to something doesn't need to be huge, but just says, we acknowledge your efforts. We know you worked hard and we value you here. So I've seen places where that doesn't happen, and over
Mhm.
time, those things just kind of pile up on employees, and they feel like they're just crapped on all day. So,
Yep.
give
Yeah,
us.
I'm a big fan of public praise and private criticism, and so when you and also not just within the context of the group. So if I'm the manager, somebody on my team does well, I think it's good to let the team know, but also in public, let my manager know that this person did really well.
Yes.
But on the inverse side of that, for me, the manager has to own the blame of things going wrong. And so when you've got a team that knows that they're going to get the praise that they deserve when something goes right, but they're going to be protected when they make a mistake. They've really got the freedom to do some great things and to take risks. And they have to be, well reasoned risks, and sound engineering principles. But sometimes we do take some risks on projects that pay off really well. But you do have to, certainly have those tough conversations in private. If, somebody made a mistake and it didn't work out right, you've got to have those tough conversations and let them know, like, okay, what happened and what are we going to do to make sure this never happens again?
Yeah, that makes sense. This thought probably ties into everything that we've been talking about, but a lot of times in another article, I think you talk about the importance of speaking up.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're in a team meeting or something. Maybe it's voicing, a no or some constructive criticism back. But what if that's a challenge? Like engineers, I think in general have a challenge with pushing back or speaking up because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times we've been drilled in school that this is the right answer. You've done calculations and there's a right and a wrong answer. And now all of
Right.
a sudden you're in a workplace and we're supposed to challenge what people think or challenge what that person did. Like, I guess it just maybe it doesn't come naturally, but how do you, I guess, what tips do you have for someone that struggles with that? And
Mm-hmm.
why is that, do you feel important to speak up?
Well, I think from speaking up, it depends. The advice will change depending on your career status, right? So for the young engineer who's just fresh out of school, and not even necessarily challenging somebody, but speaking up in a group presentation or a group idea, to say, this is what I think we should do. That I think is really critical for the young engineer, because when what ends up ultimately happening is the only way to learn how to make decisions is to make decisions, and then seeing what happens and then adjusting your decision making based on that, right? And so what you need to do is take what I would say low risk decisions, which is committing to an answer in public amongst people who are better than you are, and then listening to the criticism of it and understanding why it was criticized and then adjusting based on that. That's a very low risk, you saying in a meeting, oh, I think we should do this. Nobody's going to die from that, right? No bridge is going to collapse. No machine is going to, go off the rails if that happens. And so it's a low risk environment. Yeah. Now, to your ego, it's not low risk.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It is, but that's the only way you're ever going to be able to make a good decision, is to have made bad decisions at low risks, learned why they were bad, and then figured out how to make good ones.
I love it.
And then, as you get a little bit older, I think you sort of fall into more on the ethics side of engineering. You have to, if you look at something, a calculation, and you think to yourself, that doesn't sit right with me. You have an obligation to, as an engineer, to be able to speak up and to make those calculations make sense. Because, I can, I could sit down and write a bunch of garbage out and circle it at the end and say, look, it's fine. And so, but somebody has to actually read that and check it and think that it follows sound engineering discipline and principles. We kind of had a joke in my last job when we would talk about FEAs is that, people would run FEAs and then you would look at the stress profile after and they go, oh, look, it's all blue, which in the FEA world, blue is low stress and red is high stress, but that scale is settable, right? And so we had some guy who had his scale set way wrong and he goes, oh, look, it's all blue. And, so it's like, yes, you can make mistakes and make it look all right, but you have to actually, as an engineer, delve into the details. You can't say, oh, it's blue. You have to say, well, what is that stress? And is it okay? Is that within the acceptable limits of whether it be fatigue or if it's a catastrophic failure, whatever it happens to be, right? So
that's great. Great advice. As we march on, there was a couple more awesome articles that you've written, but one of them was about engineering in cells and why all engineers basically are involved in cells at some level. Could you maybe speak to that? Because I think most engineers that start this career in an engineering field don't understand that that's an important aspect of their job at some level. So why do all engineers need to learn cells?
Well, you've got to learn sales really because, the reality is that you in the workplace, everybody is a customer of yours, right? And so you have to be able to sell them what is right. And so, whether that be an actual paying customer, some customers, I've had customers come to me and say, hey, I want this thing, and it violates the laws of physics, right? And but I can't look at a customer and say, you're an idiot, that violates the laws of physics. I have to be able to sell them on another idea. And so, I guess I could, but I wouldn't be either working there very long or my company wouldn't be in business if we told all our customers they were idiots.
There goes your contracts.
Yeah. So I have to be able to sell them on something that works, right? You can't just, as engineers, I think we think that we think in systems, right? And so we think, oh, if I have this and I add them together, this happens. Of course, it's logical, but the people are people, right? And even engineers as humans, we're not like that. We know that there's weird preferences we have that don't make any sense, and you have to understand those and really be able to sell to your customer, to a real customer, or you need to be able to sell to your boss, right? If you've got a process in your organization that takes too much time, or it's a bad process, you want to make changes to it. What you've got to be able to do is convince him that it's worth the time to change that. And, and he may have written it. And so you've got to be able to sell him on the idea of, this is where we're at and this is where we could be. This is how much better it's a sales role.
That's good. And I think also, like, as a starting engineer, just producing a good quality product, and, knowing who you're working with as a client goes a long ways, because that client's going to turn around and say, hey, I liked that engineer, but we'll continue to do work with you. So, when you're starting out, you may not see the vision of sales, but just by doing a good job, you're participating in that feedback loop almost of getting more work.
Yeah. Well, and also I think what we as engineers don't do very well is, I think a lot of times we don't understand we're in a business, right? We have engineering practice, and we have ethics, and we have all of this, a lot of high-minded things that we're going to do excellent work. And all of that is absolutely true, but none of it happens if we don't sell a product and make money. There's nothing more important that the company does is selling the product. Because without that, there is no company. There is no engineering.
It all goes away.
Yep.
Well, I just have a few more questions. I know our time is limited. So one of the things you post about is that when you hire employees, that you shouldn't be focusing on necessarily your GPA, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe that ties to certain status in school or something. But why should employers not solely hire on GPA? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I think in that article, I talked about an interview experience that I had, and it was a job I really wanted to do. I thought it would have been interesting. I got the interview. It was, on campus interview. I got the interview, went in, sat down, and there was, they had a couple of statics and dynamics questions on paper. That was it. And then they had some, interview questions. And so I sat down, he handed me the paper and I worked through them, and answered his questions. At the end of it, he said to me, it's like, wow, you did really well on, the statics questions, dynamics questions. You did them very fast. They're correct. And, I like your personality. You did it much better than the guy that interviewed, the only other guy I interviewed. And so I'm thinking to myself, interview Elise, this is great. And he goes, but I'm not interviewing you. No, we're going to bring you back because your GPA is too low. And it's like, that doesn't make sense to me, right? I have demonstrated here that I understand what I'm doing. My GPA is low, but there's reasons for that, And so I think the reality is, and this is anecdotal, I think, but there's some other companies that agree with me. Google is one of them. They stopped looking at GPAs. I just don't see that. And I've done, again, anecdotal, but some of the best engineers that I've worked with, they've had kind of low, middling GPAs, but they're way better than people who had 4.0s. And then but I've also met some people with 4.0s that were really good. So, it's just, I don't think you can look at that number and be able to predict what's going to happen in the future. I just don't think it's a good indicator.
Yeah, I totally agree. I myself, I didn't have the highest GPA in college. Life gets busy and you can't, sometimes you can't tackle it all. So you do your best, and
right.
It's like that. Yeah.
Well, and there's really, I think, this is probably going to sound bad. I'm always a little suspicious of people with 4.0s when in the hiring process. And the reason I'll say that is that some of the people, the problem, not everybody who has a 4.0 has this problem, but the people who have this problem all have very high GPAs, is that when you give them a task and they do a calculation, they have a very difficult time that there isn't a back of the book to check their answer. They're like, so is it right? And you read it and you're like, it looks right to me. They go, but how do we know it's right? I'm like, well, I checked it and you checked it and we say it's right. Like, but there's not an answer key. And they really struggle with that of making sure they have really the right answer, which you have to get to, but that's engineering. You're the one who's the expert that says it's right. You're the one.
I could speak a little bit to that too. And this is not a knock of people that get 4.0s, but like you said, I'm sure there are plenty that don't do this, but a lot of times, the people I have personally known that have had 4.0 GPAs, sometimes there's a balance between like common sense and like book smarts. And like you're saying, they want to know where the answer is in the book, but the common sense piece is just like, you got to think for yourself a little bit. Like you have to make a call on something. Like,
yep.
And sometimes those are off. So anyway, good points there. I agree with you. Well, this has been really fun for me to do, Jake. I appreciate all the insight. I can tell you've taken a lot of time to think about these things in the engineering industry, and it's fun to just kind of hear your thoughts come out with a lot of these questions. So I guess as we wrap up, is there any resource that you would recommend engineers dive into? I guess, what's your blog site too? How can we?
Sure. Yeah. If you wanted to go to my website, it is thejakeadkins.com. Somebody's camping on jakeadkins.com. There's no site, but or my LinkedIn has got a link to all of the other stuff. So if you look me up, Jake Adkins, that's where I am. And probably I think the best resource for engineers is a book called The Unwritten Laws of Engineering by, I think it's W.J. King, and it's ASME Press. It was an article that was written in like the 1940s, or a series of articles. It's a very short book, maybe 75 pages or something like that, and it's really covers a lot of things that we've talked about here, which is really the business sense of engineering. So you've got an education, you've got the fundamentals of engineering, but how do you navigate a workplace, and what do you do? And so it's outdated, certainly being written in the 1940s. It's like, okay, there's some things in there that are kind of like, ooh, but as an overall resource, I think it's great to think about. Another one I'll say, which is just a fun one, is a book called Stuff Matters. It's written by a material science guy. I forget his full name. I know it's Mark something with an M, but if you just Google Stuff Matters, it'll come up. And it's just a fun little walk through different materials, how they were invented, how they were used.
That's awesome.
Very, very interesting book.
Okay, well, we'll link those in our show notes for people as we dive into those, and we'll make sure we point people to your LinkedIn and other stuff. So appreciate you.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this with me, Jake. I appreciate it, and I guess we'll see you in another one in the future.
Oh yeah, I would love to come back if you'd have me. So I've had a lot of fun this morning and going over this stuff. I love talking about engineering, and so I'll take any time I can to
talk about it.
Do it. Yep. So
thanks, Jake.
Well, thank you. You have a good night.
Bye. All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Jake, who is a director helping the railroad industry maintain the rail lines and stuff. So I know the railroad's been in the news quite a bit these days, but Jake brings a ton of engineering management experience to the table. He even managed 60 people at one time at the age of 36. So he's got a lot of good stuff going on there. So we wish Jake the best. Hey, if you're ready to pass your exams, we want to help you to also become a professional engineer. So check us out at civilengineeringacademy.com. If you want to check out a course for your PE, check out civilpereviewcourse.com. And if you want to help with your FE exam, we help you there too at civilfereviewcourse.com as well. So we're excited to help you on your journey to become a professional engineer. Let us help you get there, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.